Matthew.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk about masonry and architecture and just all the things that go with that. So if you could just start us off by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about the firm that you work for.
Sure. My name is Matt Lacey. I'm an architect in Utica, New York. I work for March Associates. We are an architecture firm of about 15 people. We do primarily commercial projects. We work with a lot of school districts, some higher ed projects, and then civic and institutional groups.
Awesome. And how long have you been an architect?
I have worked in architecture firms for probably 15 years. I've been licensed for maybe 8 years, and I've been at March Associates for 10 years.
Awesome. Have you been involved with a lot of masonry building design? And if so, do you have a favorite project that you could talk about?
I have been. Like I already said, we work on a lot of school projects, and most of our work with schools is renovating and working with existing buildings. And a lot of schools in the central New York area are masonry buildings. So we find ourselves working with masonry a lot in that environment. In terms of a favorite project, I'll talk a little bit about a project that we did in Stamford, New York. They have a historic school from the early 1900s that has a beautiful masonry facade, lots of beautiful detail, columns, and it was in rough shape. And we, with a lot of care, were able to restore the facade, recreate individual stones that could go back in, worked very carefully with masonry contractors to be able to kind of successfully construct that building. And the result was just stunning. And it was a proud thing for the community to have kind of restore the character of their school. It was even recognized in the Central New York AIA architecture chapter for restoration of masonry, and was a successful project for everyone.
That's incredible. And across New York State, I mean, we're really lucky here because we have a lot of amazing historic buildings in general, but a lot of them being masonry. Are there any particular buildings, I guess, in New York State that as an architect, you just really admire? Not necessarily that you helped to design them, but, historical buildings, things like that.
I actually love the Capitol complex, which has a lot of stone restoration, the Egg Theater. I don't know the buildings that well, but it's a very striking sort of landscape, and the kind of the sense of grandeur I think you get from being on that plaza, I love. And I think the fact that those buildings are masonry contributes a lot to that, just because it gives them kind of a feeling of significance and importance.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what inspired you in the first place to become an architect?
Yeah, I think the first buildings that drew me into architecture were baseball stadiums. I love baseball, played baseball, and just it was always so exciting for me getting to go to a baseball game, just being in that environment and seeing this like grand structure, and the fact that the building itself had an impact on the game that was played within it kind of elevated beyond like other arenas and other things where it's just, the field is surrounded by a stadium. It really kind of becomes part of the nature of the game. And I fell into architecture kind of on a circuitous route. I didn't know necessarily what I wanted to study and kind of focus on in college, but I was taking some math classes by choice, and also really enjoyed an architecture history class, and then kind of found architecture as kind of the merging of sort of a math and kind of technical side and a creative and kind of history side. So
yeah,
I came in thinking, I would love to work on baseball stadiums, which is not something I've ever done, and actually doesn't seem as interesting to me now as it did then. But
sure. But it inspired you and kind of piqued your interest initially in building structures.
And I've always been more interested in kind of larger scale projects. I think kind of residential style has never been kind of the primary driver for me for architecture.
Sure.
And I've been able to work on like airports and embassies and some pretty significant kind of larger scale buildings that I really like, because they have the opportunity to kind of impact a larger number of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think, when I talk about being passionate about masonry, a big part of that for me ultimately comes back to architecture. I didn't go through any, formal training for architecture or anything. But like I mentioned, I mean, it's just in our state, of course, it's everywhere. You can't really, there's no way to avoid the impact that an environment has on the people, within it. So I think that that's a really fantastic point that you brought up. What is some advice that you would give to someone who is maybe considering joining the architecture field?
So, kind of saying what I enjoy the most about it, which I would hope is something that I think if this works for you, you will enjoy architecture. I love that every project is its own challenge. There's so little repetition. I think that makes it challenging sometimes on the business side to be as successful as maybe some places want to be, but you really get to dive into a world every time you're working on a project, and they're often very different. I mean, even talking about schools, which we do a lot of now, within a school, you might have a project where you're working on an auditorium and the next project working on a kitchen, which is a very different kind of challenge. And
Hmm.
I think it's great that every time I do a project, you get to learn new things. And we joke all the time about how sometimes it would be great to do the same project twice because you get to apply the lessons you learned the last time.
Sure.
And often then opportunity never comes. So you just have to make new mistakes the next time.
Sure. And so talking specifically about schools, because I think societally this is, a big topic right now. Looking into the kind of safety of schools, whether it's, fire safety, other types of things going on there. Can you talk about, from an architect's perspective, when you're going to actually design the space or you are looking to renovate a space, what are the things that you are most concerned with or are a priority to you?
When a lot of original school buildings were built, they were built with codes that aren't current. And current building codes kind of have enhanced requirements beyond what was originally done. So we often find ourselves having to kind of bring existing structures up to current codes.
Okay.
And um, things like exiting occupancy are kind of considered more carefully now than they were previously. You're limited in how big a building can be just to ensure that you're not going to have too many people kind of potentially in an unsafe environment.
Good.
And the solution to kind of expand on buildings that maybe weren't as kind of built with those thoughts in mind is there's something called firewalls, which are like really robust structures that will separate kind of one portion building from another.
Hmm.
And the most natural way to kind of achieve that is masonry construction, because it inherently has a lot of those properties that you need to achieve in terms of being able to withstand any sort of protection damage. So
Sure.
we often are looking at even something small, like if a school wants to expand their locker room a little bit to add some storage or to update the showers.
Hmm.
If the building is existing and doesn't conform with the kind of area requirements, you would need to provide a firewall just to put a tiny little thing next to it.
I see.
And masonry is kind of an easy solution for those sorts of challenges.
Hmm.
We find a lot of focus on kind of enhancing security at building entrances. That's often the focus, with kind of, concern of people coming from the outside potentially want to do harm to occupants inside.
Yes.
Schools weren't built with that as a concern necessarily.
Right.
So we often reconfigure spaces in the building to have the main office and people kind of at an administrative level closer to the entrance,
Hmm.
and then having a secure way to interact with the public before they come into the building.
Yep.
With, once again, having kind of, masonry is a very good tool for those applications because it has such durability and kind of security inherent to it.
Yeah. I think that you brought up a lot of really fantastic points there. But, one of them being there are a multitude of things that, whether someone was building a school 100 years ago or they're building a school today, there are these things that, are top of mind, I guess, for the designer. And so it's interesting to see how, society is also impacting how architecture trends are changing in a way. Do you find that those trends are showing up in other types of buildings as well, such as like malls, or you mentioned airports? municipal buildings, what are the things that you're looking at for those structures as well?
So security absolutely kind of becomes a topic on almost every project that we do.
Hmm.
How the entrances are secure. I mean, there's kind of the physical side of security, and then there's a technology side also. There's a large world of cameras and that sort of technology that
Yep.
enhances those sorts of things. Um, Another kind of on a shifting the topic a little bit, but similar, there's a lot, you know, the just the nature of airflow in a building
Hmm.
is a lot. There's a lot more concern now, even than probably 10 years ago.
Yep.
Looking at natural ventilation, having mechanical systems that have UV lights to potentially, make the air cleaner
Sure.
is something that we see in a lot of, and that is something that is a priority in these sort of larger public spaces and maybe isn't as much of a priority at kind of smaller scale projects.
Got you. That is a really interesting point with air quality. I don't know if you can speak to this at all, but I have learned that bricks in particular are antibacterial or different things like that. Do you work at all within the like healthcare space with hospitals? Have you had any type of experience with masonry in that setting?
Not as much healthcare. The
Okay.
closest we've come to healthcare is a parking garage for a hospital.
Okay. Okay.
Which
Masonry structure though,
yeah,
right?
concrete. A lot of
Okay.
concrete. Yeah.
Okay.
Masonry, yes. Mhm.
Can you talk to me about a challenge that you face in your job?
So one of the biggest challenges I think we face on almost all projects is kind of finding the balance between the budget, kind of dreams and reality.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, people have a lot of ideas and a lot of great plans, and often the budget doesn't necessarily align with what the ambition is. So then finding kind of the right things to emphasize and picking out the kind of key components of any project that are worth, investing a lot in, and then trying to work strategically to make other things happen more economically.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a challenge.
Okay.
There's no project that doesn't have a budget, so it's always a factor.
What is a change that you would like to see in your industry that you think would be beneficial for architects like yourself?
I think starting with just a challenge that I see is that kind of we started talking about background in school and how that relates to careers. And there's definitely a difference between kind of what you're learning in school and what you're doing kind of in practice. And I think I consider myself pretty fortunate because I was fairly naive, I think, to what architecture actually was. I liked school a lot, and then I kind of found a home working places and I enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
it. But I think that transition can be hard for people that um, enjoy architecture school, sort of succeed in an academic environment, which is
Yeah.
very free thinking and not oftentimes not as kind of technical or grounded. And then landing somewhere and having to work on projects where all you're thinking about are details and less exciting aspects.
Sure.
So kind of we probably across most industries, we have, and especially in the Central New York area, we're always looking for talented new people to join our team.
Mm-hmm.
We are fortunate to have a lot of projects going on, and our challenge is trying to meet everyone's deadlines and expectations. So
Yeah.
any kind of path to bring new people excited who want to become a part of that is to our benefit.
Can you talk to me about some things, in your opinion, that you don't think that people know about masonry buildings or structures that you are aware of as an architect? Could you kind of walk me through what some of those things might be?
Especially on the interior of a building, I think
Mhm.
there's opportunity to use masonry as a finish that can um, go beyond people's expectations in terms of what um, that product can do. I think it's always interesting when you see buildings that kind of bring masonry to the interior unexpected ways, whether
Mhm.
it's in corridors or bathrooms or any spaces that um, you might not expect to find a product that you would think of as just something on the outside of the building can be really interesting.
I really like that you brought that up because brick interiors, especially, I think that it's really becoming much more of a trend. I've noticed even in resident, homes now, that's becoming a big thing. And I think a lot of people, I agree with what you're saying, where a lot of people might only assume that it is an exterior material. Um, and a big topic with architecture, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's the longevity of it, but it's also the beauty of it. The aesthetics and how something looks really is important in architecture. And so can you kind of tell me, when you're looking at designing a beautiful structure, do you usually consider using masonry materials for that? Or would another material kind of come to mind first? Or would it be maybe a mix?
Yeah, a mix is the easy answer there. I
Sure.
think there's masonry is always, especially if you're talking about a structure that you're really wanting to bring a lot of beauty and significance to, the durability of masonry is a kind of clear distinguisher that would make it something you would want to choose.
Uh-huh.
There are options of materials that are maybe could be less expensive for installation, could be quicker to install, but wouldn't last the same way. For me, it's always kind of a challenge to find the right solution for the right project. We definitely don't come in kind of with a preconceived idea of like what a building should look like before talking to the people and understanding the context of everything around it.
Yeah.
And so having an opportunity to use masonry is always great, but it's not something that gets kind of forced in to fit every problem.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever have clients who come in and they kind of already are telling you, we want the building to be made, out of metal and glass only? Or is it usually up to the architecture firm to kind of make those decisions?
Often clients that we work with will have like an idea. It might not be said as coherently as like we want the building to be brick or whatever, but they'll say, I really love this. They'll give an example building. And that's always a fun way to kind of have those conversations, is to hear like, what do you like? What don't you like? And then someone might describe buildings that they like, and they might not even know why they like them, or they might not even understand what the commonalities between things. And we might not even kind of get it right away either, but sometimes you can kind of pull out of those sorts of things, key factors and components that can really kind of achieve the kind of vision of what the person has.
Mm-hmm.
It's always fun to kind of we'll start a project and just end up, amassing images of random buildings and, start with 50, 60 images, and you're looking at stuff, and we'll put together presentations and do that with the client, and then start to have a conversation where from there we can kind of get into what's the reasons that things are liked and not liked.
Mm-hmm. A mood board.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Basically.
Mood board of architecture.
Yeah. And it changes too. Like, I think a lot of people are impacted a lot by their environment and kind of their experiences, and you remember stuff that happened more recently. So, we were working on a project, and then someone will say, oh, I was just out to dinner last week and I went to this restaurant and there was this really great blah, blah, blah. And that wasn't even on the table at the start of the project, but then kind of becomes a fact that you work in. And I feel like it's, it's going out. It's the things that happen outside of your daily life. It's an opportunity when you're going out to dinner or on a vacation somewhere that you sort of have experiences and see stuff that can kind of get drawn into projects that becomes fun.
Definitely going on vacation. I always am looking at the architecture, and actually that's kind of an interesting point maybe you can speak to a little bit, is the kind of regionality of different architecture types. So in the capital region and in the Utica area, actually, we do kind of have similar, I think it's a lot of like Dutch influence in the architecture. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, there is, I think what connects the capital region, Utica, being the Erie Canal and the riverways, brought a lot of industry and kind of industrial style buildings, which have a lot of brick and masonry. See a lot of old warehouse buildings that, as industry left, kind of fallen into disrepair, and now are being kind of reimagined in new ways and stuff, which is a theme across both areas, which I think is fun. And we've had, opportunities to kind of work within historic buildings and kind of breathe new life into them is always exciting um, opportunity.
I think that's amazing. Um,
Yeah,
and yeah, even I don't know, I have gone to Mexico before, and the architecture is just so different.
right.
A lot of that, of course, has to do with the weather,
Climate. Yeah.
things like that. But I just think that those are such fascinating, I guess, bits
Mhm.
of architecture.
And just native materials too.
Hmm.
Like, a lot of the stone from this stone and buildings this area was, quarried locally.
Yeah.
It's hard to, I mean, maybe some like marble will come from Italy, but the bulk of the material has to come locally. And, in a place like Mexico, you're working with materials that are kind of local there, which have a different feel and look and
Yeah.
character.
Yeah. In another episode, we actually kind of got into that topic more, where we were talking about with bricks, especially. The clay is usually sourced locally.
Yeah.
So, the city of London, the red color of their
Mhm.
bricks is
Right.
different, than the bricks that we would create here in New York. So that type of stuff is just so fascinating. So when you are working with contractors in the process of designing a new building, are there any challenges that you typically face, and can you kind of speak to those?
I think a challenge that I feel as an architect is not having the kind of knowledge of construction that contractors do.
Mhm.
And the way a lot of our projects are structured, where we're on public projects where we're kind of basically completing the design and then it's being bid to a contractor, there's not really an opportunity for conversation, communication, and sort of the chance to share knowledge and kind of enhance the quality of the design through kind of shared knowledge.
Mhm.
I never feel like architects are in a position to just sort of dictate the way something needs to be built, because there's just so much knowledge that the people building it have that can help us. And there's finding opportunities to kind of share that knowledge is always beneficial to us.
Yeah, like continuing education for architects. Do
Yeah.
you see there being an opportunity for mason contractors to even come in and have networking, or just are more conversations needing to be had?
Yeah, we've enjoyed the opportunity to have Upstate Masonry lunch and learn in our office.
Mhm.
We especially like hearing about stuff that doesn't work based on experience
Mhm.
and kind of things to do and not to do. There's a lot of products, especially when it comes to sort of detailing, waterproofing, flashing, all of that. There's a lot of products that are kind of at our disposal to specify, to use, and we I feel like kind of being able to rely on someone's expertise of saying, I've used that product before. It worked great in this application.
Mhm.
It didn't work well in that application.
Yeah.
It's very helpful for us to be able to kind of call for the right materials in the right places. The other thing I'll say on that is that a great time, although it has its challenges, is on a construction site.
Mhm.
We are I really enjoyed the fact that with our work, all of our projects are within a 3-hour drive of our office. So and our role extends through construction always. So at a minimum, we'll go to a job site once every 2 weeks. In reality, it often ends up more, and probably in practicality, it should be more than that.
Sure.
And every opportunity you're on site, it's one thing to hear from a mason in your office, it's another thing to actually see the work happening in the field.
Yeah.
And um, you learn a lot kind of having those chances, and then for our office, trying to get younger architects an opportunity to see that
Mhm.
is even more beneficial, because even for myself, there's just a scale of things when it's being constructed that's hard to imagine when you're looking at something on paper and you know you're drawing little lines and little rectangles, and then even when you print stuff out full size, it's still 1/96 the size of what it is when it's built. And then
Right.
it's hard to have appreciation for how heavy that thing is to put up there, or
Yeah.
like how hard it is to work this corner, just when you're drawing it in paper. And
Yes.
seeing it in the real world really helps you get a sense of those things.
And I love that you brought those topics up, because ultimately that is even the goal with doing this podcast, right? Is to kind of bridge the gap between all of the people who are involved in buildings. And so that we can, build to last essentially, and make our societies, our communities better, and last longer.
I guess the flip side of that would be having the opportunity to show contractors sort of the tools that we use to design the building on our side,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of software and technology that we use to put together drawings that could potentially help them when it comes to quantifying things and kind of seeing more perspectives on that maybe a drawing can't necessarily deliver.
So are we talking kind of like a 2D version versus like a 3D version
Right.
of a building essentially?
Yeah, I mean, in all of our projects, we're using a BIM software where we're building a 3D model of the building, and
Mhm.
that gets translated into drawings, which get printed out and brought to a job site. But there's a lot more information in that model that never makes it onto the drawings that could
Mhm.
have value in some form, even if it's just, you know, I would love to see what this looks like over there. We can cut a section and it
Yeah.
kind of start to give that information.
I think that that is really important information for masonry contractors, and even, other people within the trades, anyone who's a contractor, essentially, I guess, to maybe be aware and like look into
Mhm.
BIM modeling and just kind of learn more about it, because I think on both sides, there's things that all of us can learn so that we can come together and work better
Absolutely.
together.
I will confess that I have not done one of the upstate masonry days. I know the upstate masonry does kind of for architects a chance to
The
go to.
masonry day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have people in our office that have done it, and I've only heard good things, and I want the opportunity to do it. I'm sure it will be
Awesome.
humbling trying to stack CMU blocks up, and
Yeah.
maybe
Yep.
made me think more about whether to question the thickness of a joint somewhere.
Hmm.
But I hope that I can do that. And like I said, I've only heard good things from people who kind of
Oh, that's great.
taking advantage of that opportunity.
That's great. They definitely will be coming up, and I'll be sure to send you an invitation for it. Thank you so much for coming in and talking with me today and sharing, your experiences, your expertise on all of this. I think it's going to be really informational and interesting to our viewers. So, if you enjoyed this episode and you would like to learn more about masonry and the intersections with all kinds of different topics, please, subscribe, hit like, share, all of those things. And make sure to check out our website at masonrynetwork.org for upcoming events, educational opportunities, and more.